painting to photography, from beadwork to woodworking, KQAL FM on the campus of Winona State University presents Art Beat. Art Beat highlights the work and accomplishments of local artists from in and around Winona. Support for Art Beat is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
Welcome back to part 2 of our interview with artist Dwight Huang, featuring KQAL's Giovanni Bermudez and KQAL's VJ Heron, here on Art Beat.
Gyotaku is a traditional Japanese form of art using real fish to paint a picture. Dwight Huang, a California-based artist, creates these beautiful art pieces and will be joining us on Art Beat this week to talk about his paintings. He recently had an exhibit at the Minnesota Marine Art Museum in Minnesota. I'm VJ Heron, joined by KQAL Giovanni Bermudez with Dwight Huang on Art Beat.
Well, if you're open for our interview right now, I'm actually joined in here by another interviewer, Ventris.
Yeah, how you doing, Dwight?
Yeah.
Some of your artworks, well, a lot of them, I noticed at least 3 that were a result of what you just mentioned, the death by acid. I'm sorry, say it again. It was...
Yeah. Oh, domoic acid.
Right. There was another one about a sea lion that died of a very similar issue. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So domoic acid is something that happens naturally, but it's confounded by the warming waters, changing climate, and things that are dumped into the ocean. I mean, that's how I understand it. I'm not a scientist. I'm just, trying to remember what the scientists tell me. But basically, it's human activity that makes it even worse. And it's this chemical that I think it's produced by the algae, and then it permeates into like shellfish and other small fish, and then sea mammals and even people. If they were to eat this contaminated whatever, then like the effects can range between anywhere from like paralyzation to death. And so like all these years, and it's apparently worse in the summers is what I understand. And there's just been like record amounts of marine mammal deaths from, sea lions, dolphins, and whales.
Yeah, you also had some very interesting human portraits at the exhibit as well, like the Lucian Resilience, Dashi Wishes, and also the Two Spirits. I can see those were very detailed and very, very nice, to be honest. And I just wanted to know your input on how you went about making those and what inspired that.
Yes. So, early on, every once in a while, people would come up to me and say, or ask if I'd be willing to do a human print, and we're talking about live people, and the majority of these people, actually all of them, in the beginning anyway, right. They would just come up to me and ask for a vanity print, can you print me, or can you print this person? I've even had a strange one asking me to print their ex-girlfriend because she's hot, and I was like, no, I'm going to stay away from that. It's kind of weird. Wow. And so, and also I've yeah, really. And so I've seen human prints before, and they looked really creepy. They looked like cadavers, and it just didn't look like something that I wanted to do. And it wasn't until the whole Black Lives Matter event was happening, and me being a minority as well, I've dealt with all kinds of stuff growing up, and so I wanted to participate somehow, and I'm not any good at speeches or anything like that. And I was really struggling, because I wanted to be some sort of voice and have my input in it. And then a friend of mine asked me, or told me, do what you're good at, make art. And I was like, oh yeah, duh. And so I invited a friend over black friend of mine, and I was like, hey, let me borrow your hand. Let me like print the fist, like in the Black Lives Matter logo.
Right.
And I printed that, and I posted it on Instagram, and like I didn't really think of it. I just felt like I had to do something. I wanted to do something, and so I posted it up. And the very next day, like my inbox and everything was just completely filled with messages asking how they could get a copy of it, a print of it. I was like, I don't know. I didn't think that far ahead. And so what I thought was, okay, how about this? Any of you who want a copy of this print, send $50 to whatever Black community outreach that you like. Show me the receipt and send me $10 for shipping, and I'll send it to you. And we ended up like raising like $4,000 within a week. And
wow.
And that's what started my whole the printing human thing. And I thought, if we could do this with a fist, like maybe it's not vanity prints that we should be looking for. It's real, like powerful human stories. And so then we started reaching out to like social workers and asking them to be like our eyes and ears, and to like listen for and look out for really, really powerful human stories. And then these stories started coming in, and then we started getting introduced to people. On the outside they look like regular people, but then you listen to their stories and they're just very harrowing and really powerful, very sad. Very inspiring, 'cause
the art pieces that you make with the human portraits are very detailed, and you can actually see a lot in it, and the depth in the art and all that. I don't know all the descriptive art terms, but it's very descriptive, and the paints a real picture, especially once you read the description with it. So
yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. I mean, those are what I'm really excited about. Fish printing is one thing; it's fun, and I enjoy it. But my passion really goes into these human ones.
What would be your favorite piece that you've made
At the show? I think my favorite experience was probably the football fish, just because it was, it was just this rare fish, and we were just surrounded by scientists, and everyone was just so excited about the whole process, and it was like natural history in the making. It was really neat to be a part of. But as far as like the actual art piece, my favorite one is probably the one called the wishes one, the portrait of the woman, the sex trafficking survivor.
Oh yeah, the dandelion.
Yeah, the dandelion one.
Well, speaking of those, we did see the 3 human portraits you had on display there, and there was the 2 spirits, dashed wishes, and Aleutian resilience, if I remember.
Yeah, Aleutian.
And I know that there was the 3 descriptions there pretty much tell the story, but I'd like to get it from your point of view. Can you give it, like, you can do, if you could do all 3, that's great. If just one, that's fine. You mentioned dashed wishes, so I guess we can start with that one. Can you give us a story behind that and how that came to be?
Yeah, so there's a social worker who introduced us to this lady. So she's a sex trafficking survivor. She's her story is that she got sold off by her stepdad when she was 12 to the sex trade, and she escaped it when she was 18. Like I would read news articles about things like this, but I would shake my head, read it, and say, "Wow, that's awful." But then it would sort of end there, and I was really ignorant to the whole subject. But when she described everything, it was hard not to imagine my own kid in a terrible situation like that. And it was just heart-wrenching. It was really awful. And you can't help but to think, wow, life can be so unfair. It's like, how does this stuff happen? And so we printed her. So the process is, with every one of these human subjects, we print their face first. We listen to their story. We talk to them. We print their face. And then I spend the next several months trying to figure out how to go about it, how to compose it so that, and what things from nature to use to finish their portrait, so that it, the things from nature also tell the story. And so for her, it was a real struggle. I think for her, with her portrait, it took me the longest time because I really didn't want to rush it. And it wasn't until one day I took my kid to the park, and he was playing with the other kids, and the kids would take a break and they would pick up dandelion seed puffs and make a wish and blow on them, and all their wishes were really like frivolous and trivial, and like, I want a new Lego set, or I want new shoes, or things like that. And I immediately thought back on her and thought, I'm sure there's so many wishes that, like these carefree ones, that she would love to have made but wasn't able to because of where she was and all the nonsense that she was made to do. And so that's how I decided, okay, we're going to turn her into a dandelion and compose her hair filled with, I don't know how many hundreds of dandelion seeds to represent that. Two spirits. That was a really interesting, very eye-opening one for me. So we were in Oregon, and some folks said, "Oh, you really need to meet this guy. He's an elder of the Siletz tribe, and he has a wonderful story to tell." And so when I met him, one of the first things that he said to me was, "I'm gay," and I was like, "I don't care," but inside I was like, "Okay, whatever." But like, I didn't know what to say to that because that's not what I was expecting, and so I said, "Oh, you must have had a rough childhood." And he said, "No, that's actually exactly what I wanted to talk to you about today. I've never been mocked or teased within the nation." I was like, "Really? How is that possible?" And so he explained to me that within a lot of the indigenous tribes, there's a shared word, and it loosely translates as two spirits, and meaning someone who's gay, lesbian, trans, non-binary is a person whose body contains both the spirit of a man and a woman. And instead of being mocked and ostracized like in mainstream culture like ours for being different, instead they're considered such a rarity that they're celebrated instead. I was like, wow, that is incredible. It's such a small twist in perspective, and all of a sudden it's very inclusive. And so with his portrait, he loves basketry, by the way, creating baskets. And typically in the tribes, that's done by the women. But, he really enjoys it. That's what he does for a living. And so if you look at the portrait, you'll see like weavings and basketry to represent his female side. And then typically the males decorate their headdresses and whatnot with eagle feathers. And so I printed eagle feathers to represent his male side.
And what about the Aleutian resilience part?
Yeah, so that one, that was a neat history lesson for me. So, a lot of us know or are aware of Japanese Americans being interned during World War II because they were considered a threat, and so they were placed in camps like very far away, and a lot of them lost their homes, and a lot of them, they all lost their businesses, and their lives got uprooted. It's interesting because it happened to them, but I don't think it happened to Italian Americans or German Americans. Anyway, but what I didn't know is that during the same period, the indigenous people on the Aleutian Alaskan islands, they were interned as well, and that's something I thought it was only Japanese Americans, but they were interned as well, and I quote, for their safety. And so they were moved from their island to another place in Alaska, to the mainland. And what I was told is that a lot of them didn't know what the mainland part of Alaska was. And see, if you ever go to the Aleutian chain, like it's a part of Alaska that has no trees. There's no trees. There's no large animals. In fact, the largest animal is probably like the seagull and a bald eagle. But it's very different. And all of a sudden, they find themselves being transported to an abandoned factory to figure out how to live in. And then, now they're surrounded by trees. Now they're surrounded by like very large animals. And I've heard what I was told is a large number of them ended up dying, and for all like sorts of reasons. And it was just another one of those, colonization stories that went bad, and it was pretty eye-opening. And so, talking to this guy, he's the chief there, and he spoke about colonization and basically trying to like wipe out their culture. Because when they came back, all their homes were gone and their businesses were gone, everything was gone, and so they had to rebuild again once they were allowed to go back. But he emphasized that they don't want to hate, but they don't want to forget either, and so they want to stand strong and resilient, like the plant life on their island. And the plant life there is such a windswept island. Like, the plants have to be really, really strong and just be really, really resilient. And so we decided that we were going to recreate his body wearing one of their traditional sea mammal hunting parkas. And these parkas are quilted. And so in each quilt is like one different type of specimen, botanical specimen that you find on that island. And in some of those quilted squares, like, I didn't want it to be contained, and so you'll see some of the squares, the plant life is like emerging out of it, because you cannot contain life. And
the way you spaced all of that out and everything's very detailed and artistic. I'd probably never be able to do that well. But tracing back to like some of your earlier beginnings, where did you when did you first start to show off your art, when you felt got the hang of it, or you really were going to pursue the marine art, the Goyotaku?
Oh, this art, well, I don't know. I started this hobby. I mean, it was all, it started out as a hobby about 15 years ago. And I never really showed anyone except for like close friends. And like, even some of them were like shaking their heads and saying, yeah, it's kind of ugly. But it wasn't until maybe 5 years ago where I started feeling a lot more confident about, the direction I was going and the quality of the work. And, I think like 5 years ago is when I decided I was going to try to do this full time. And it's been that way ever since. And I think, like, personally, it's the last 2 years that have been like good enough for me to look back and say, hey, I'm actually proud of these. These are pretty good.
Right. So it's been like a steady process to where now you can look back and be like, the journey's been great, because the art now looks amazing.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to look at stuff in the beginning, and I hope that like every year I can look back at the previous year and say, yeah, I can do a lot better now.
Do you see yourself pursuing like any other types of art to create for your like exhibits, like instead of just marine life? Any other categories?
Oh yeah. I mean, we do, like, we've had opportunities to print land-based botanicals, land animals. Like, I've printed a deer. I had a client ask me to print a rat before, and that was interesting. It turned out really nicely. But turtles, birds. Birds have been really popular. Been working with the museum on those.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned turtles because one of your artworks, the juvenile green sea turtle, you mentioned you use a process called suminagashi. Excuse me if I'm saying that wrong. Can you elaborate on that process and what that is?
Okay, so the turtle itself remains in the Gyotaku style. Suminagashi is, so in Japanese, sumi is ink, and then nagashi is it means flow. So, like, it's literally printing water. It's actually very similar to, like, I don't know if you've ever seen the process for marbling a bowling ball. You know, they'll like float a bunch of heavy paint. I don't know how heavy it is, but paint on the surface of water or something, and they'll dip the bowling ball in it, and they'll get that marbling. It's essentially the same thing. So you have a vat of water, and then you float the sumi ink on it. It's a little trickier than it seems. It's a lot of fun, but it's pretty tricky, and it's very hard to control. It's like, if you imagine trying to control water, it's just like that. And then once you have the pattern that you like on the water, on the surface of the water, then you dip the paper in there and get it out, and then it looks like, flowing waves, or it can look like a branch or whatever. But that's suminagashi.
So I noticed in some of your art, you mentioned how traditionally speaking, the fish would be taken from a profile point of view. But you didn't do that for some of your artworks, and you said it was to give it a bit more life. What really sparked you to kind of break tradition like that?
Yeah, so typically, Gyotaku prints are done on the broadest side of the fish. And that's usually easiest, and that's the most straightforward. It wasn't until, I wanted to print koi, the carp, the koi fish that you see in the gardens and stuff. And I would print them, broad-sided on the flat side. And I would show people, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, that's a nice fish, but what is it?" And I was like, "Oh, but you're missing it because it's such a nostalgic fish for me." I mean, probably not just me. I tend to think a lot of Asians would feel the same way. And it's like, how do I get this so that it reads like, one of these garden koi ponds? And I realized, it needs to be read from the top. I need to figure out how to print this thing from the top, because that's how people see it. And so I figured out a process. There's a few extra steps to do it. It's tricky, but it's definitely possible to print it from the top. And by doing that, or having done that, people then see it, and they're like, "Oh, I know exactly what that is. I've seen that at the Japanese gardens." Yeah, exactly. And so that's what started that whole venture of printing things at different angles and twists and turns and whatnot.
I do have a further question. I found your art inspiring, if I'm being completely honest. I love anything from East Asian culture, so when I saw your exhibit was on display, I kind of jumped on to cover it. And it was breathtaking to see the process and the final results. And my final question would be, if someone wanted to follow your art and do it themselves, maybe they felt inspired by what you did, or maybe they're like, hey, maybe this doesn't have to be fish. Maybe I can take something from my culture and put it into this style, kind of merge the cultures a bit. What would be your advice to them?
My main advice, I think, would be to... This is something that I see pretty often. For example, like in Eastern cultures, like if you mess up on something, a lot of folks, a lot of artists will just, they'll throw it away, and they'll do it again, and they'll just repeat that process over and over and over, because there's so much emphasis on perfecting their process rather than trying to make something perfect. And I think a lot of Westerners get too bogged down with trying to create something perfect without perfecting their process. And that really only comes with a whole lot of repetition. If you think about, like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, fight the urge of correcting something, or fight the urge of covering something up, or covering up one of your mistakes, or accepting a mistake. Instead, it's just a sheet of paper. Like, who cares? Throw it away. Do it again. I mean, it doesn't take that long to make a second attempt, a third attempt, and I guarantee it's going to get better and better and better as you dial in. I think that would be, like, my main advice.
All right. Well, I guess the last question is there anything you'd like to share with our audience before we end the interview here?
Go see the show. It looks cool on Instagram, but, like, it looks way better in person.
All right. Well, thank you for doing this interview with us, Dwight.
Yeah, of course.
I appreciate your time. That concludes today's Art Beat interview with Dwight Hang. Thanks again to Dwight Hang for his insight on his traditional Gyotoku paintings on exhibit at the Minnesota Marine Arts Museum. Be sure to look Dwight up on www.dwighthang.com. For more conversations on art, tune in to Art Beat Tuesdays at 12:30 right here on 89.5 KQAL. I'm VJ Heron, joined by Giovanni Bermudez, and we've just heard from Gyotoku artist Dwight Hang on Art Beat.
Art Beat is written and produced by KQAL FM on the campus of Winona State University. Visit us on the web at kqal.org.